"Hello, handsome. Wanna take me home for the night? I promise I won't charge you too much," a lady called out to Josh as he stepped out of the Hilltop Hotel. "No, thank you," Josh declined, barely looking up. His focus was on reaching his car and getting back to his comfortable bed at home as soon as he could. Having just wrapped up a tough 3-hour business meeting, his mind was still half stuck on profit margins and market shares, and he was not in the mood for the flashy nightlife vibes. As he walked to his car, he adjusted his tie with one hand and played with his car keys in the other. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfumes mixed with the tantalizing aroma of street food from nearby vendors. The blend of high-life music and laughter filled the air, creating a stark contrast to the fatigue he felt. Just as he spotted his car, a figure slipped smoothly in front of him, blocking his path. Before him stood the sexiest lady he had ever seen. Her shimmering gold mini dress clung to her like a second skin, sparkling under the hotel's neon lights. She wore a wide smile, her face expertly made up to enhance her striking features. "Hello, cutie," she said in a flirty tone, stepping closer with a confidence that made her seem larger than life. "Looks like you could use some company tonight." Josh raised an eyebrow, taking in the sight of her. "I'm actually just heading home," he said, trying to avoid her. But she mirrored his movements with a playful grace, still blocking his way. "Ah, cutie, no need to rush. Life is too short to always be in a hurry," she teased, her voice smooth as velvet. Josh couldn't help but let out a reluctant chuckle. "I admire your persistence," he admitted. "But I really must be going." "Oh, come on," she pressed, her eyes twinkling seductively. "What's the harm in a little chat?" Sensing the genuine warmth in her approach, Josh paused, considering. "All right, just a chat then," he conceded, his tired eyes struggling to leave the lady's body. They moved to a quieter corner of the bustling hotel entrance. Emma, as she introduced herself, leaned in slightly, her expression turning more serious. "I'm actually in need of your help," she began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You see, I'm stranded here tonight." Josh's guard went back up. "Stranded how?" he asked, skepticism lacing his tone. "All my friends left with their clients for the night, and here I am, left alone without anybody to check me out." "I have nowhere to go," Emma explained, managing to look both pitiful and sexy at the same time. Josh frowned, not entirely buying the story. "And you need?" "Just a place to pass the night, nothing more," she hurried to say. "I won't mind following you home if you'll let me." Josh shook his head, stepping back. "I'm not interested, can't you just go back home?" he said flatly. "Moreover, how sure are you that I'm not a serial killer?" Emma's lips twisted into a sly smile. "You can't be dangerous at all. You even look like a knight in shining armor, kind of." "Looks can be deceiving," Josh replied, trying to sound firm and uninterested, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. Despite his better judgment, Josh found himself drawn into Emma's story. They sat at a nearby bench, the nightlife noise around the hotel fading into a dull roar around them. Emma sighed, looking down at her glittery shoes. "To be honest, I don't just hang around hotels for fun. I'm homeless," she confessed, her voice shaking with a mixture of shame and defiance. "This is how I survive. I find someone who can take me home for some overnight fun, then I come back here the next day to find someone else." Josh looked at her, his expression softening. "Wow. Are you for real? That's insane," he exclaimed softly, his tone gentler than before. "It's not my first choice, believe me," she said, meeting his gaze. "But a woman has to hustle to feed herself in this expensive city, you know? When life gives you no other option, you just have to use what you have to get what you want. And how's that working out for you tonight, homeless girl?" Josh asked, a slight smile playing on his lips. "You're too funny," Emma replied with a laugh, her spirit seemingly lifted by his attention. "Yeah, That's because I find you interesting. But I need to make it clear to you that there's no way I'll let you follow me home, Josh said casually as he laughed with her. Hearing Josh say that made Emma more desperate. Look, I'll be straight with you, she said abruptly, her eyes searching his. If you take me home, I promise to have fun with you all night, free of charge. I promise you all the enjoyment you want, I just need a place to sleep. Josh stiffened, his face hardening. I'm not interested in that, he stated firmly. I offered to listen because I felt sympathy, not to take advantage of your situation. Emma looked surprised by his rejection, then quickly masked her surprise with a forced smile. I had to try, right? But I respect that. Really, I do, she added quickly, seeing his discomfort. He sighed, holding his head in his hands. I can't believe I'm considering this, but if it's just a place to stay you need, I have a couch. But you have to leave first thing in the morning, okay? Josh offered, setting clear boundaries. Emma's face lit up, feeling relieved. You won't regret this. I promise, she said earnestly. Josh doubted that very much but nodded, resigned to his own decision. Let's go then. It's late, and I have work tomorrow. As they walked to his car, Emma's voice filled the night air, a stark contrast to Josh's silent contemplation of the odd turn his night had taken. It took them only a few minutes to walk to Josh's car, parked a few blocks away from the hotel's main entrance. The street was quieter here. The bustling nightlife noise had faded into a dull hum. Josh clicked the car open, and Emma slid into the passenger seat with a loud sigh, feeling relieved and grateful for the promise of a warm couch to sleep on after a hectic day. As Josh started the car, his mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Just to be clear, he began, keeping his eyes on the road, you're leaving first thing in the morning. Emma nodded. Yes, I understand, and I really appreciate this, Josh. You're doing more than most would, she said softly. Josh's grip tightened on the steering wheel. It's nothing, he muttered, feeling a mix of irritation and pity. He couldn't figure out why he felt compelled to help her, but a nagging voice in his head reminded him of his sister in a distant city, who might find herself in a similar plight. The ride was mostly silent, each lost in their thoughts. Josh occasionally stole glances at Emma, who stared out the window, her expression unreadable. As they drove, Josh decided to break the silence. So, how did you end up becoming a street girl? You know, looking for clients in front of hotels, he asked, his voice cautious. Emma turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting a depth of sadness for a moment before she masked it with a smile. It's a long story, involves making a few too many wrong choices and trusting the wrong people, she replied, her tone light but the underlying pain evident. Josh nodded, understanding the delicate balance of curiosity and respect for her privacy. We all have our stories, I guess, he said. Yeah, what's yours? Emma asked, turning the conversation around. Josh chuckled, a short, humorless sound. Not much to tell. I work too much, sleep too little, and try to stay out of trouble, he replied. That sounds safe, Emma observed, a playful twinkle returning to her eyes. Safe has kept me free of complications, Josh said, thinking of his own past choices that led him to a solitary life, focused on work and little else. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they drove, discussing favorite foods, music, and the peculiarities of Lagos life. By the time they arrived at Josh's apartment, a fragile bond had formed, woven from shared laughter and glimpses into each other's lives. Josh's apartment was a modest one-bedroom in a quieter part of town, away from the hustle of Lagos's main streets. As they entered, Josh switched on the lights, revealing a neat, minimalistic space. Make yourself comfortable, Josh said, pointing towards the couch. Bathroom's that way if you need it. Emma nodded, her eyes scanning the apartment with an appreciative look. It's nice, very organized, she commented, setting her small bag down. Josh felt a little bit embarrassed at the starkness of his home. I don't really have guests often, he admitted. I couldn't tell, Emma joked, easing the awkwardness with her humor. Josh laid down the house rules then. No smoking, no additional guests, and quiet hours started at 10. Emma agreed without hesitation. She was simply grateful to have a roof over her head for the night. Emma made herself comfortable on the couch, draping a thin blanket over herself that Josh had provided. Josh, meanwhile, found himself pacing in his bedroom, unable to settle. He was second-guessing his decision, uneasy about the stranger in his living room and the unpredictability of the situation. After a restless hour of flipping through channels on his television, Josh gave up on trying to sleep. He stepped out to the living room, finding Emma still awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice soft in the dim light. Emma sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Guess I'm used to a harder bed, and typically, when I get actual clients to take me home, sleeping is usually the last thing on the agenda," she quipped, attempting to smile. Josh sat down at the other end of the couch, a safe distance between them. "You don't have to make jokes," he said gently. "It's okay to just be." Emma's smile faded, replaced by a more sincere expression. "Thanks, Josh." They talked about everything and nothing, from their childhood memories to their hopes for the future. Emma spoke of her dreams of one day leaving the streets behind, perhaps starting a small business. Josh listened, surprised by the resilience and ambition still alive in her despite her circumstances. Josh shared his own ambitions, more subdued and practical, yet with a sense of loneliness. "I don't really let people in," he confessed. "Maybe I'm scared of getting hurt." Emma nodded, understanding more than he realized. "It's easier to keep the world at arm's length," she said. "But sometimes, it's worth letting the right ones in." As the clock ticked toward midnight, their conversation dwindled, and a comfortable silence settled between them. Josh felt a connection to Emma that he hadn't anticipated, a shared understanding of life's complexities. There seemed to be a mutual sense of respect and perhaps the beginning of a friendship as Josh and Emma continued to share their stories. Laughter had slowly replaced the solemn tones of their earlier conversation, with Emma recounting tales of the more absurd clients she'd encountered in her line of work. Each story was followed by her infectious laugh, and even Josh, typically reserved, found himself chuckling along. "You wouldn't believe this one guy," Emma said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "He paid me just to listen to him rant about his wife. I mean, I just sat there, nodding and eating snacks. Easiest money ever made." Josh shook his head in amusement. "Sounds like you could have been a therapist instead of, well, you know. Who says I'm not both?" Emma quipped, her smile wide. "I listen, I give advice, I give pleasure, and I charge by the hour. Sounds about right, doesn't it?" Their laughter faded into a more serious conversation as Emma's face softened. "But for real, Josh," she began, her tone shifting, "I dream of more than this. I've always wanted to own a little shop, maybe selling clothes or beauty products. Something that's just mine, you know?" Josh nodded, moved by her aspirations. "You'll get there, Emma. You're smart and resilient. You can make it happen." Her smile in response was filled with hope, a stark contrast to the life she was currently living. For a moment, the weight of their individual burdens seemed lighter, shared and understood. Josh finally drifted off to sleep on the other end of the couch, his thoughts a mix of admiration and concern for the woman next to him. When he awoke a few hours later, the apartment was silent, the early morning light casting long shadows across the room. He turned to wake Emma, intending to remind her of her promise to leave early, but stopped short. She lay unmoving, her face peaceful but unnaturally still. A sense of dread washed over him as he called her name, gently shaking her shoulder. "Emma! Emma, it's time to wake up." There was no response. Panic rose in his chest as he checked for a pulse, his hands trembling. There was nothing. She was not breathing. Josh's mind raced as he stepped back from the couch, his heart pounding. He ran his hands through his hair, trying to think. She couldn't be dead. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. His first instinct was to call for help, to call emergency services, but the fear of how it would look held him back. A dead prostitute in his apartment. No one would believe nothing illicit had happened. He imagined the police arriving, the questions, the suspicion. It would destroy his life. He paced the room, each step echoing his escalating fear. How could he explain this? Who would believe that he had simply offered her a place to sleep, that he had done nothing wrong? After several minutes of frantic pacing, Josh made a decision. He couldn't risk his future on the truth being enough. He had to move her body, had to make it look like she had never been there. Josh's plan was desperate and risky. He would wait until nightfall, then take Emma's body somewhere far from his apartment under the cover of darkness, somewhere it would look like she had simply died on the streets, another unfortunate soul lost to the harshness of city life. He spent the day in a state of anxiety, barely able to function. He pulled down the blinds, locked his doors, and waited. As he did, he thought of Emma's dreams, her laughter from the night before, and his stomach turned with guilt. What would she think of him now, taking such cowardly steps to protect himself? Yet, fear was a powerful motivator, and as the day turned to night, Josh prepared to act on his plan. Josh, dressed in all black clothing, carefully moved Emma's body to his car, parked in a shadowed area near his apartment. He had chosen a secluded spot by a river known for being a place where the homeless often camped out. It was risky, but it seemed like his best option. His hands shook as he drove out of his apartment, every streetlight casting ominous shadows, every passing car a potential witness to his dreadful task. The weight of what he was doing pressed down on him, but he didn't have a choice. Nobody would believe he had nothing to do with Emma's death. He had to fix this the best way he knew how. Upon reaching the river, Josh found a spot shielded by overgrown bushes. With every movement, he whispered apologies, hoping somehow that Emma could hear him, that she could understand his actions were born of fear, not hatred. As he laid her down, he took one last look at her face, at the peace that death had brought her, a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind in his life. With a heavy heart, he ran back to his car, glancing back one last time before driving into the night, away from the scene that had changed his life forever. Josh was barely a mile away from the river when a police patrol van pulled close to his car. His heart sank as he glanced in the rearview mirror to see them signaling him to pull over. With a trembling hand, he steered his car to the side of the road, his mind racing with panic. As the officer approached, Josh tried to compose himself, but his voice shook as he handed over his driver's license. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, attempting to sound calm. "We've had reports of suspicious activity near the river and we noticed you coming from that direction. Mind if I take a look in your vehicle?" the officer asked, his flashlight beam dancing across Josh's face. Josh's stomach churned. "Not at all," he said, though his voice betrayed him with its quiver. The discovery was inevitable. As the officer opened the car trunk and found a woman's wig and shoes. "Care to explain why these items are in your car trunk and not with you in the car itself? Would the owner not be mad at how carelessly you're handling their stuff?" Before he could provide an answer, the officer's radio crackled. "Sir, you need to see this. We found a woman's body near the river. It looks like it was just dropped." Josh's world collapsed. Hearing the report, the officer immediately placed Josh under arrest. He was handcuffed on the spot, his protests and explanations drowned out by the officer's call for backup. At the police station, inside a stark, fluorescent-lit interrogation room, Josh faced series of questions. The detectives were relentless, their doubts clear as they analyzed his story. "You expect us to believe that she just happened to die on your couch?" And instead of calling for help, you dumped her body by the river?" one detective asked, his tone dripping with disbelief. Josh threw his hands in the air, feeling the walls closing in around him. "I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought no one would believe me," he stammered, his desperation palpable. The evidence, however, was stacked against him. His car had been seen in the area, his fingerprints were all over Emma's body. With each passing moment, Josh's hope dwindled, his fear of a life behind bars becoming more real. Josh was charged to court where the prosecution team made a spectacle of the trial. Fueled by sensational media coverage, the whole world believed Josh to be a cold-hearted predator rather than a man caught in an unforeseeable tragedy. In the courtroom, the prosecution portrayed him as calculating and sinister, weaving a narrative that left little room for the truth of Josh's panic and misguided decisions. Every piece of evidence was twisted to fit their story of premeditation and guilt. Josh's lawyer did her best to counter the accusations, highlighting his lack of criminal history and the testimony about his character from colleagues and friends. But the tide of public opinion was against him, the jury's faces growing increasingly skeptical as the trial progressed. As the jury took their break to reach a verdict, Josh sat with his lawyer, his head hung in shame and regret. The courtroom fell silent as the jury returned, their faces solemn. Josh's heart raced as the foreman stood, the verdict slip in hand. "We find the defendant, Josh Adekunle, guilty of second-degree murder," he announced, his voice echoing through the stunned courtroom. Josh felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. The sentence came swiftly, life in prison without the possibility of parole. His lawyer's hand on his shoulder felt distant as the reality of his fate sank in. He had tried to help someone, and now he would pay with his freedom. In the quiet solitude of his prison cell, Josh reflected on the cruel twist of fate that had brought him here. He thought of Emma, of their brief connection and her unfulfilled dreams. He remembered their conversations, her laughter, and the brief sense of companionship they had shared. Irony colored his thoughts. Had he simply turned away that night at the hotel, both of their lives would have been vastly different. Instead, his act of kindness had led to this, a life confined to these cold walls. Josh wrote in a small notebook, a practice he had started to keep his thoughts from consuming him. He wrote about justice, about truth, and about the fine line between right and wrong that he had so disastrously crossed. As he penned his thoughts, he wondered about the world outside, about the stories of others like him who slipped through the cracks every day. His story was one of many, his life a testament to the unforeseen consequences of a single decision. Josh's tale ended in tragedy, but it began with an act of kindness, a complexity that the world outside his prison cell had chosen to overlook. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel.